Hello, everybody, and welcome to the experience. It's been a little over a week since I've seen you, and I'm really excited to share my friend and guest, Kate White. She's an amazing astrologer. Welcome, Kate. And she's so much more than an astrologer, but I'm gonna like let this unfold. It's very like juicy and mystical and exciting. And so Kate is a different kind of astrologer. And so you'll get a sense of how amazing she is just through our conversation. And we're just gonna flow. So welcome, Kate.
Thank you. Yeah, it's hard. I like astrology a lot. I like lots of different tools. When you're trying to make sense of something complicated, sorry, there's military bases nearby, so occasionally
we can't hear it.
plane
The
action.
Blackhawks flying over, well, we must be talking about something very important when military comes online. But so what we wanted to talk about first is the energy right now is bonkers, and you can speak to that from an astrological level. I know that we're sort of on the downslope from the 8-8 Lionsgate, and we were going to do a show on that, and then it ended up being too bonkers for us to even be able to actually do a show. And so the energies are, I don't know, have they subsided? What do you think?
It's a good question. And yeah, you inspired me to have a long think about what Lionsgate is all about and why it could potentially feel that way. So that's
a long think. I like that.
It was like the whole freaking day. I thought I was just gonna like bash it out, but you get deep into things and
well, you're a deep thinker, Kate. You're a deep thinker.
I can't help it.
That's great. We love that.
Thank you. When things are bonkers or complicated, put it that way, I have found astrology to be the best tool because it's effectively giving you a language, a very specific language to describe the moment, because the planets up there are basically just like a very complicated clock. And so you're looking at what time it is now. And so you're not saying the planets are causing what's happening now. It's simply the time. And because those components of that clock have their own set of cycles, you can pick and choose which aspects of the clock you want to look deeper into, what cycles are connected to it. Look back and think what happened the last time that this particular component of this time was going on. And that's how you piece together an understanding of the clock, of the cycles, and how you're likely to behave or relate to those different cycles. So when things are bonkers, it's usually also a time of transition in some ways. And to me, at least, bonkers means there's a sense of confusion, or there's a sense of being unsettled and not knowing what's coming next, or not being able to trust what came before because you thought it was going to stabilize you, and then suddenly it's like the rug slipped out from underneath you.
That's totally what it feels like, right? I mean, I think that is super accurate in terms of, just feeling into the layers of consciousness on the planet. It's like, it feels like that's in the air. It feels thick in the air, that it's what people are navigating. And I'm only just intuiting it, but my solar plexus is like, whoa.
Crazy times. Yeah, and the thing with astrology too is you can get readings on the weather, the external things that are likely to be impacting everyone. But you can also, comparing your own clock or birth chart, your starting point when you took your first breath on this planet, and use that, start of your cycles, map it against what's happening now. And some people more than others are going to get overlaps or interactions between the clock up there and your birth clock. And that accounts for why some people will feel things or react to things more than others. Maybe there are some people out there who are just looking around and like, whatever, you know, they're not feeling it as intensely. I don't always want to like be in the defensive position of astrology is real, astrology works.
Let's just assume it does. So there's no defense. It's just out, it's just a beautiful thing that people can play with. And if they're not resonant with it, they can piss off.
I like that. Yeah, no, it's like, it's just a tool. And similarly, you could say, you can have apps on your phone to help you keep schedules or be accountable for things,
Totally.
whatever.
It's a tool. Absolutely. Well, and it's I think too, what's cool about astrology in general is the people who are drawn to it, really, they're drawn to it. It's like a passion. And the way that you look at it versus the way another person looks at it, I see it as its own sort of unique artistry and lens. And you take what feels to me like more of a deep dive into it. I mean, I think, and you talk about it, I think you've mentioned that it's like more of an ancient type of astrology. Speak to that a little bit.
I dabble, and I like testing things out. I like trying different things, different techniques, hearing what people are doing and see if it fits for me. I studied ancient Latin as my major, languages and poetry.
I didn't realize that you actually, that's tricky.
So,
tricky for me anyway.
There's a part of me that has given a lot of my time and energy to the classical world. And now we're in a period where ancient techniques are being translated for the first time and shared. And so there are all these different ancient astrological techniques that are being rediscovered right now. So it's pretty exciting. I recognize that if you're using older techniques that took place in a certain context with a perspective of how life works and all that, that paradigm is locked into those techniques. And so I'm not saying that we should go back to the roots and use the old system the way it was, because that's going to apply to us in these days. I don't think so at all. But
I think that's very visionary of you to even speak to that, because I think that that's super important right now. Like it's an innovation is what I hear you saying. It's like you're taking an old technique and working it in a way that it has relevance to today's time.
Yeah, and I've also fallen into the trap of golden age thinking and being, disappointed with the way things are, the way people seem to be doing things, and wanting to find a value in tradition, wanting to understand tradition for myself, because the way I was raised and such, individualism was encouraged, being progressive. And so I was seeking roots in some way. And it's probably why I studied what I did. It's probably very grounding.
Yeah.
And so it's given me time to chew on processes, of the past, how it influences the future, and what that evolution looks like. What happens if you try to go to the root of something, and understand that process. And it's been awesome for things like hypnotherapy or general working with clients and problem solving, because it gets you to the core issue. If you're treating just superficial stuff, that can be what a person needs at that moment, because they're not stabilized enough to make a deep, overwhelming change. But if you want to prevent something from coming back, or really get to the source of it, that focus on the past is usually helpful.
So there you bring in another layer, which you are a hypnotherapist as well. And so
I am now. Yes. Thank you.
Sure. No problem. So what's cool is I would imagine that you're infusing all of the different skill sets that you have in your work, which is super cool. Yeah. So how do you do that? I'm so curious to know.
Well, That's a good question. Feeling it out. No,
I'll let you know when I figure it out.
well, it's constantly evolving, and you know, it's like, well, I'll get into that later. I use astrology when I can as a diagnostic, because above all the other things it can do, and I won't get into, I mean, how great astrology is could be a 5-hour plus discussion, because it's one of these multi-tools. It just does every freaking thing you want it to. But so on cool. Top of
that's cool. I mean, that's fantastic.
In the hands of someone skilled enough, you know, to use all those different little arms and gadgets.
Yeah.
But as a diagnostic tool, it provides a language. You can see where someone's at. You can get a sense of where they probably feel they want to go, because you are aware that the planets are constantly in motion. You can see, you know, the area of a person's life that is likely to be impacted or illuminated next. You can see where they've come from. Usually when they're talking, they'll mention something in the past. So the astrologer part of me was like, okay, when's the date for that? I always feel like I'm interrogating someone. Like,
that's so cool. I love that.
What were you doing 14 years ago, you know, around 7 a.m.? You know, like, I don't freaking know. So I say, go into your Gmail and see what you were doing.
Oh my gosh, wouldn't that be cool to do that hypnotically? You could do that like go regress, you know, go to that moment. Well, and what popped into my head when you were talking is, you know, because I think, you know, I've been doing some research on womb regression, and then regressing from womb into the pre-conception phase and preparation to come into the lifetime. And how cool would it be to ask about if the alignment of the astrology is intentional, and if that, I mean, because I always ask when I'm doing womb regression, if they're getting this level of detail, who decides when the actual birth starts to happen? Who initiates it? But I'm wondering from an astrological point of view, like, is there a moment when the stars are just so that the soul is like, okay, now we go?
There has been research done on this. And
oh, really? Yes, oh, cool.
Recently, I, for one reason or another, was studying. Well, usually, like, a bunch of clients will come to me with the same thing
stuff
for no reason, and so then it inspires me to look into it further. And so I found myself looking into conception charts, and I had clients where they weren't born at the time that they were supposed to be born, or they don't have a birth time on their astrology chart. And so for one reason or the other.
What's a conception chart for those who don't know?
Okay. So no, it's a great question. You can cast a chart for any moment. It's just basically stopping the clock and looking at the sky at that moment. So a conception chart would be, instead of the birth chart, is usually supposed to be the moment of first breath that a child takes. You see a lot of rounded numbers in birth time. I think it was about 4 o'clock, or, you know, the doctor.
There's so much going on. Yeah.
2:15. Not very likely that they were, you know, watching the lungs and the clock at the same time and taking that down. As an astrologer, you can, in my belief, you can determine the actual precise time, because, well, it's an art called rectification, which is very fun. But
you better rectify.
they're to speak to your point of having things line up. The more you look at significant moments in your life and match them to the astrology, you start seeing, yes, indeed, things do line up super precisely. So the conception chart is the moment the child was conceived. When that
I'd be curious about that with my kids. Yeah, for sure. That would be fun to explore, for sure.
And there are, and older astrology tended to be more predictive and matter of fact. And a lot of astrologers were probably killed because of that, because are we going to win this war or not?
Like, oops.
When should I, you know, it was very much of like, when should I do this? not taking into account reality of multiple timelines, possibilities. The way of life was a lot more predetermined, at least at one point in history. And you can see that techniques from that period have that same kind of mindset. So there are calculations for the part of birth or part of children. It's a mathematical point rather than a planet that you can calculate on someone's chart, taking in averages of positions of planets and such. And so there was a belief that your child will be conceived on this day when certain planets activate this point. That was within the cultural mindset that there is a time for it.
So you better be ovulating. You better be ready, honey.
Well, they would probably argue that, or you could argue, because these techniques do theoretically work. I mean, in the limited testing that I've done with clients or people sharing their experiences and dates, there does seem to be something to it. But again, it's not the astrology causing that. It's simply reflecting what is already going on in a person's life. If a child is going to drop in, as a psychic, you can see children hanging around people's fields. The old wives' tale, you can tell when someone's going to have a baby or whatever, they've got something in their face or whatever. It's just like, it's there. It's also there in the astrology of people, but you also have free will, whether you're going to take that ride or not. And usually if something doesn't happen, it's like the energy still moves through the person's experience. Maybe someone close to them is having that experience, and so they're learning from it indirectly through another, or they're, there's a house in an astrology chart that is offspring. And you can have people with a bunch of stuff in that house, and it doesn't mean they're going to have a bunch of kids or anything like that. They could work with children, or like
have a project that they're going to birth or something, right?
Precisely. There's, and then that leads people to say, well, astrology is BS because if it can mean so many things, why look at it in the first place? And to some extent,
they shouldn't pay attention to astrology. It's not for them.
Well, you could make the same argument about, agriculture and astrology is actually quite similar, where it's like, or I'm thinking of like taking care of a goldfish, like it died, so I'm not going to try. It's, it's like,
right. There's no point.
You can have that attitude towards it. But with the agriculture example, what's going on in the soil, how you're taking care of it, what, climate, there's so many factors, and yet we still have agricultural science and development in that area. And it's similar with astrology, but it is something that, is best studied over the entire lifetime, because some of these cycles that you're dealing with, Saturn is 28, 29 and a half years to go all the way around. You're not going to experientially understand Saturn unless you're at least that old, because you've experienced this full cycle.
Saturn returns.
The Saturn return, that's right. And it doesn't mean that you have to wait to be a certain age to practice or start studying astrology. Just understand that things will continue to unfold as you get older. So maybe don't assume, or,
well, I admire people who have the talent to do astrology, because I clearly am not designed to be an astrologer. It just is not a part of my experience that stays with me. It's like, it's like I'm very clear on what works well, but I don't know if it's because maybe I was one at some point and I don't need to explore. That happened to me too, where I know in this lifetime I was intentionally avoided any sort of relationship with music, instruments, singing, all of that stuff, because I have done that so many times in so many lifetimes that I like sort of, nope, you can't do that in this one. You got to look this way just to explore this, just stay focused. And so, but there have been times where I'm like, ooh, I want to do that.
I'm like, doing my best, like not to pull up your chart right now. And like, look into this, because whenever anyone starts talking about something, and
well,
it's like,
you do whatever you feel compelled to do. There are totally no rules. But I think it's interesting because I had actually not thought of it in the way of like, it's something to bring along with you throughout your entire life. I think in my mind, it's been, it shows up and it's like, ooh, that's fascinating and interesting. And it so always aligns and resonates. But I think now, because I know so many more astrologers like that are, especially you too, you're just easy to connect with. It's like, oh, why wouldn't I check in with with the astrology of the moment about that? Or why wouldn't I, it's just this added layer of data.
it is. And we are in the information age, or at least that's what we call it. And I personally, have and had, still maybe have a little bit of a resistance to too much tracking, like get the watch, get, the heart rate, all this other, blah, 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 blah. It's
Are you sleeping? Are you snoring?
Yeah. I'm like, okay, so I'm going to get like blasted with Wi-Fi while I'm trying to relax my body so that I can tell if I'm, sleeping.
Yeah, you could do that yourself.
You can theoretically, but I've become less of a curmudgeon with this kind of stuff, where I notice, for example, with setting, fitness goals and such, being aware of what you're actually doing. If you have goals, you can reality check yourself and, and use that information to motivate and build in a very concrete way. People also can get obsessed with tracking everything, and that's a danger. It's technology addiction that people have. And I don't want to call myself an astrology addict, but definitely went through a phase of just really intense passion for gathering data and studying. But the difference was, I think, because I had applied that to other divination fields beforehand, and learn the hard, like especially tarot cards, which is a whole nother topic. You can learn the hard way if you attach too much to a reading, or you or to an interpretation of a reading. Right. You can really screw yourself, and so with astrology, you can track, you can observe, you can note this stuff, but jumping to conclusions based on it is always dangerous.
Right. Just like mediums or psychics or other people, I can only really apply it to, well, I mean, like whether you get a download of something or a person says, oh, this is in your field, or this is what is coming through for me, or in a psychic reading or whatever. Yeah. Having an attachment to that interpretation it's really just a perspective. It's like, it's an opinion. And again, my point of view, which I've said on the show a million times, is it's the sovereign opinion of the self first, and then the opinion of others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Everything is just data that's like, does that resonate? Does it not? And I think in this life, certainty, we put a lot on certainty. And I just, and maybe you, and the experience of being a hypnotherapist, certainty isn't necessarily, I believe, why we came here. It's really more for the journey. It's for the experience, the unfolding of what this human adventure potentially can offer us. And
it's a topic that I've had to think about a lot. It's why I stepped away from tarot for a while, because the environment, the culture around it, the practitioners who were cool people were doing things that felt extremely toxic to me. Because the fact of the matter is, if you are living reactively, then certainty matters, and somebody else's certainty is dictating what you're doing.
Ugh.
You're not.
That's my idea of hell, honestly. Yeah.
Well, it is a good point. I would agree with you. It does feel like hell if you feel like you're being inhibited by other people's walls. However, I've also noticed that people take comfort in perceived certainty, because it gives them an excuse to numb themselves to feeling what their own inner compass is saying. And so, if you've got somebody else's certainty, somebody else's narrative, you get to be a victim when shit happens. It's not your responsibility.
Totally.
Sorry, I don't know if you're allowed to
No,
swear.
no, of course you can. Are you kidding me? I think that's a really fantastic point, and it's exciting to me to talk about it, because when we are under the impression that someone can provide us with safety on a level that is not knowable, that really can fuck us up. That can then that victimhood becomes such a quick grab and go thing that I think we see in the culture so rampantly right now, because people are feeling like things external to them, people external to them, circumstances external to them need to be safe in order for them to live their lives. And it's like, I always come back to the point that's like, okay, we as souls decided to live on a celestial body that's twirling through outer space on the surface of a celestial body, no less. Like, how can you promise safety ever? Like an asteroid could just take us out at any minute. I really don't think our souls were really worried about that.
But I was thinking the other day, if I may, the earth is tilted too. I mean, I was meditating on like finding balance within myself, and like, why do people like the 80-20 rule and all this, it's like, why is everything not certain? And I'm like, oh, well, we are tilted. So maybe our sense of balance, the masculine and feminine balance is by nature tilted right now.
Well, and doesn't the tilt change?
I would assume so.
Yeah,
but that's not my area of expertise.
Mine either. And I know that there are pole shifts, and I don't know if that means that the tilt of the axis of the planet shifts, but I think it does. But I'm not an expert.
It sounds persuasive, but I have no idea.
My job is to persuade you. I don't know, but it sounds good. But I think balance is a really good thing that can come from that topic of safety and victimhood. And it's interesting that you say, from personal experience, that the realm of tarot card readers can be a little bit toxic, because there is this vibe that you get from people who do tarot cards. It's like, there's a coolness that you're sort of drawn in by. And I'm not saying that all people are that way, but I think it's a mindful thing to mention that it's almost like a power dynamic. It's like when you get into, when you get in, go ahead, speak to that. Yeah.
No, I've just wrote like 3 different articles that touch on this, the power dynamics, just a general culture of disempowerment in reading.
Wow. I want to hear more about that.
Let's see what else. I mean, there's so much wrong with it, but there's also what I noticed in people. I mean, I call it exotic fetishism. People have, in the past, they wanted to go to foreign places, people still do, but travel is so accessible now. So
they need to find new things that are exotic,
different, and they're kind of projecting that onto mysticism or
I love that.
And what is hidden is taboo. It's it promises all this stuff without showing you what it is on the surface,
right?
And that can feed a lot for someone. And
so it's sort of like, what are you saying, like you're perceiving sort of an inauthentic exploration, or maybe even a surface exploration, like looking at the shiny aspects of a particular, of tarot card reading, or of some esoteric medium.
And that draws people in. And I'm not going to blame capitalism for it or whatever, but if a person is supposed to sell themselves or their services, most people use that element, that promises something to draw people in,
right?
And it's unfortunate that it exists, but it happens in other fields and whatnot.
Right. Well, that's why people in the field I'm as a hypnotherapist, just having to actually communicate to people, because there are the sort of like proverbial snake oil sales people who have bullshit people, and not been of service in a way that's kind or beneficial,
And,
client oriented.
yeah, legally speaking, it was illegal to practice these arts as well. And so, if that is something that you've traditionally been doing and suddenly it's illegal for you to use your gifts, you'll, find a way to do it. However, and also, I mean, it was going a lot of different directions with this, but deception is a huge part of how people within magical traditions were forced to learn, or initiation, feeling into the truth versus, the mask. And
oh, interesting. I had never heard that explained that way. Say more about that.
Okay. Well, it could be a long chat. I found within,
and we only have 10 minutes. I think my client wants to show up 10 minutes. Well, but we can do multiple parts. There's no rules here.
Yeah, because I would say deception and the magical path, either as a practitioner and you're on your path of self-discovery, or working with clients, is a huge subject. I mean, think about it. There's the crossroads is so important for choosing and changing patterns.
Right. And what I think is interesting is, well, the healing arts, and this is just the way I see it, you can't have success as a healer I guess to a large degree. But I guess you have to figure out what success is for you. I mean, case in point, a friend of mine was talking about this shaman that she had been working with, and he was connected to somebody who was somehow dealing in dark magic, and I don't really know the details of it, but he was supposedly really awesome. And then there was the question, well, if you're like, do you not know that you're working with somebody who's sort of got a dark thing going on? Or, I mean, it's an interesting thing, like figuring out your lane and what it is that you do, and to what degree, like how much light are you, how much of a light worker are you like a medium a light worker? Are you like blasted on high? Like, and that means different things, I would imagine.
I would say so. And we like to, give people's roles and ranks and titles and all of that. That feels good to
like
the brain.
A hierarchy.
Hierarchy.
Yeah.
But also there's a case of, maybe people who are very good at what they do in the work setting, but their life is a total shit show. It's like, do you want to take advice from this person necessarily? And, right. Or conversely, you expect the practitioner to be fucking pristine.
Yeah. It's okay. It's
very
okay.
Emotional about it. No, and this sort of savior, it comes back into the victimization thing, is that you need to put this person on a pedestal because they're supposed to fix your problems, and unless they're perfect, spotless, you're screwed.
Right. And there are plenty of people who are like, sure, put me on the pedestal as a practitioner.
And this is another topic, perhaps, or maybe too dark, but, and then we'll
just see what happens.
Sure. All the gurus, all these people on pedestals, not just in spirituality,
across the board. Yeah.
All this gnarly stuff that they have. In my opinion, they do it because they can't maintain that mask, that face. And so It creates weird energetic, they look like crazy windmills to me.
Distortion. I mean, well, and I can also speak just from the experience of like a past life that I had that was really, I was just a very, very bad person. Very bad, like the worst. And I wrote about it in one of the anthologies that I put out in 2020. But I was a person of influence and a person of power, but I had horrific abuse. And so I was really just a husk of a person, in terms, like the soul had been so damaged from the human perspective that it was just like total sociopath. And I don't really know where I'm going with that, other than I can feel like, this is what I feel when I look at politicians. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle they're on. I just look at politicians and I go, yep, I know what's going on there. Like, I can feel it. It's like, I've totally done that.
Well, I mean, they're dealing in power. And if people are giving their power responsibility to someone and they are carrying something that is too much for one person to carry, or the system in which they're working cannot ground and stabilize them, it's kind of just setting the stage for corruption and whatnot. And I'm not judging these people. I'm also seeing that they are they're setting themselves up for this slip ups and failure, because the system itself is people are designed to take more personal responsibility, be aware of the impact of their choices and actions. And so that's kind of what my approach to using mystical tools with people is, to show them the backside of personal empowerment, responsibility, what resources they have most available to them. They can do anything, but the light in their astrology chart, for example, is shining here. It's easier to see this stuff. Their shadow is likely to show up here. So when they walk through life, there's an awareness of, whether they're projecting, whether they're just doing it because it's easy, or whether it's something that feeds their soul. All these, components of decision making, there's a language for it with astrology.
Right. I love that, though. I love that, because I don't think we talk about that. I think when there's guruism that takes place, whether it's in like the yoga community, or whether it's like, coaches or leaders or whatever, politicians, there is often a pathway to success for them, but the like navigating into the shadow areas and how to navigate that in a way that creates more stability and like character and I guess alignment and authenticity, I guess.
It's challenging.
It's not shown. The people aren't shown how to do that.
It's people. It's basically people's relationship to authority, because the other extreme of nobody knows anything, I'm just going to do what I feel like, and maybe
it's all I can hide that somehow. I can pretend that is hidden,
or just not see a value. Sometimes this is another huge topic, but there are great teachers out there. They're not necessarily perfect or right about everything. And some of what they say can be really useful if you take it, reflect on it, and see if it relates to you. If they are needing you to do what they say, there's a lot of really toxic shit in older traditions from all over the world where you have to surrender, which means obey and do what your teacher says. That is devotion. If you're not devoted, then you're not really on the path. All this really toxic gaslighting. There's an element of truth. There's an element of truth. You got to, change your boundaries and find that within yourself. But the way it was done isn't necessarily healthy or necessary anymore to get the point across.
Well, I think it's so true. It's so true. It's funny. My husband was not funny. He was in a Pentecostal, he grew up in a televangelical Pentecostal church. And the guy he just died at like 99, and he was quite, a manipulative character. And it's all started coming out, Reverend Ernest Angley, it all started coming out later on and in his life, but he never took responsibility for the behavior. He cooked the books, but even as a young child, this guy prided himself on controlling things. And I wonder, I think about this sometimes too, like there's right around the time that Scientology was developed, and like MK Ultra, and the guys who were involved with the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, who were also connected to like Aleister Crowley, those guys. That all was like a time, like is a similar time frame. And what the hell was going on with the astrology then, where it was like, we need to create false belief, or these structure, these belief systems that are so structured and almost institutional in their way of being. And I feel, and so it was almost like the time that leaders were exploring deception on this deeper level.
Oh, this is, I mean, at one point I was pursuing a PhD and I wanted to study the magical tradition and was looking at this,
oh, wow.
this pattern in Western magic, from the roots.
Wow.
When it surfaced and became more mainstream, and when it went back underground, because it is an unbroken tradition. It just had moments of coming up, spreading, going back under, you know, reformulating itself and coming up again. I think, you know, all things probably have growth and decay cycles, or public, private, you know, that's night and day, whatever.
What's happening in this country, this might be on the decline of a cycle.
No, I mean, if you wanted to talk about what's happening now and actually pull up the chart and go through the astrology of the moment in a more accessible way, totally happy to do that, because this year is very distinct compared to last year, both intense in their own way, and the types of forces that people are having to contend with are quite precise.
Wow. Well, maybe we should. I mean, I'll just have to say that we'll have to pick it up when my client shows up. But until that happens, we'll roll.
Yeah. So at that point in history, there was a great opening that happened. I try not to demonize anyone historically. And I mean that sincerely. One, because I'm just projecting my own shadow stuff onto them. It's not to say that I'm whitewashing everything and not looking at perceived flaws, but I know that there's another polarity point to something that is perceived as negative that's going on. There are many factors, and the historical context in which a person is living is likely to impact why they do what they do, their definition of what is right and ethical, you know. What is
it's
right
very
changes.
Unique, right. And I think that's an important thing to state, because that isn't like the reason this show that I want to explore these things is not to demonize. It's to just genuinely be curious and discover different points of view. And we can't know what other people's journey is either. Like, we can't know what motivates someone. We can project and assume, but we can't actually know. And I do believe, just on a soul level, that we're all evolving because of everything that's happened before. Like, it's all playing a part in the reality that we're co-creating together. So yeah, and I love that you said that. Yeah,
I'm gonna stop. I mean, it's a big topic, so I'm holding myself back.
And it's what's fun too is, like, when there's a topic, it's, you're like, oh, this is a big topic. I'm just like, oh, what about this? And you're like, but this is a big deal. Because you want to give it the honoring that's due. And I appreciate that. Well, what feels juicy to you to talk about? We've covered so many sort of like, oh, maybe here, maybe we could look here. What do you want to talk about?
I don't know. I mean, how much time is there?
I don't know. We can't know the unknowable at this point. What I think we should, what I also wanted to bring up is the relationship with gender in this time frame. So it would, whether we talk about it today or in another part 2 type thing, the idea that you have the astrology for the current time, which I think is fair to talk about that now, but also talking about how there's gender fluidity happening in our culture right now. And it's for real. I mean, I have a non-binary child, and was it I think it was Joe Rogan that quoted Camille Paglia, which is just interesting in and of itself, but saying that he had said something that that she had done research on ancient Rome and Greece, and you had maybe you know about this too, that at the fall of
I mentioned this in the hypnotherapy class,
oh yeah,
actually.
oh
That, yeah,
yeah,
there's, statues to hermaphrodites, and, what that there seem to be. I mean, it's not my expertise, but I did notice a correlation, and I studied a bit about, the fall period of the Roman Empire, that this kind of fluidity seemed to happen
present.
as structures were falling down. Identity, gender are structures too. And so it makes sense that even these would be questioned. If these buildings are falling, everything that we've built up and assumed is crumbling around us, we're going to start questioning what, we thought to be taken as given.
And our kids, just this generation coming in of kids, are like, don't you put me in a box. Like, there is no box here. And what's so cool about that is I think the millennials get it. And so they're like, sort of like from my generation, and then there's like the millennials, and the millennials are more sort of nimble in that space too. But even more so the Gen Zs or Zers, is that who they Gen Z?
I'm not very good with all these new names for things that are coming up. I don't really know.
I think that's what they're called. People know, but I'm talking about like the teenagers now, that are coming of age, and it's just, they're wired. Like I recently, and this is total segue, I recently had a client who was 18 years old. I didn't even need to induce her. She was instantly in soul mind. And I'm like, okay, what are you getting?
Yeah. And things like generational trends are marked by astrology. If you're, when a planet changes sign, if you're dealing with a slower planet, it's going to be in a sign or an area of the orbital path. That's what the 12 signs are. We divide the orbital path into 12, and so they're little sections. When it moves into the next section, you get a different wave, trend, feel, attitude towards whatever that planet represents. And so people born within the same decade, for example, will have this larger placement in common. And if you look at that, you can kind of see that, yes, this is a common thread that they all share. Or classmates, they're all likely, well, all of them, but, what am I trying to say? There are different planets that spend different times in different signs. And whether that's 1 year, 2.5 years, 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, you can look at brackets of people from different backgrounds, whatever, that fall within that category of having that particular planet in that place. And there are common threads among them.
Yeah, like my generation in Star Wars.
And definitely,
there's Gen X. There's just, so I could spout it all off because that was my generation, not was, is, but it's cool, sort of from my anthropological training, to see, like you're talking about trends. It would be, we could talk forever, Kate.
I love talking.
Yeah, me too. And also to have the training to notice trends and what that kind of means and implications of that. And I think we're at a really interesting time in humanity. And in terms of my work, and I would just assume, because I know about your work, that what's really, I think, important is to be offering a really positive option for people to move into, like, oh, here's an opportunity where you can actually connect with yourself and have authenticity and feel empowered and feel like you can totally kick ass and not be totally suffering all the time and have an amazing life, whatever that means for you specifically. As opposed to like, everything is falling apart and it's crap and it's a nightmare and there's viruses and
it's a challenge, because sometimes to get the life you want, but if you feel like you want to go in a certain direction and there are obstacles every freaking time and you're trying to understand why that's happening, sometimes you do need to look deep at, I don't even want to call them errors because we learned from everything, but there may be some dark shadow stuff that's uncomfortable to look at that is the core and reason why you may be stuck in a particular cycle, that you feel that there's something more, and yet this is what keeps happening. And so your mind is telling you, well, you deserve it or whatever, there's all these influences that can make you feel ambivalent about what's going on. And usually a deeper part of you, when you're really connected to yourself, however you get there, makes you feel like that there's another way to approach it. I love astrology for stuff like this because you can be very specific about the kinds of voices that are going on. Is it, inspiration? Is the lesson here to open up and trust this? Is it that you need to make a decision, actually commit to something? Are you supposed to be, are you breaking through? Are you, what?
Right. Like gives you like an arena to consider why this is happening, not just sort of like this global, what the hell?
Sure. And then you also, you have the timing too, which, it was helpful for me being empathic. And earlier on my journey, I felt everything. Still kind of feel everything. But it was really overwhelming to the point of like, I wanted to end my own life because it was just too much stuff everywhere and no solution. And so
that's awful.
My experience it was what it was. I'm still here, still kicking. So it's all good.
And that's awesome. Well, and I'm sure so many people who are listening to this can completely relate. And so it's great to hear the other side of it.
Overwhelm was life, and it was basically life and death as far as I was concerned. So as someone who, and there are obviously people that helped or shared information that changed the situation, but because
what was it that really got you, like what helped? Like was there something that really pushed you sort of up over the hump?
Different things at different moments, and I can get to it in a moment. I just wanted to say, because my own journey was so intense, I am aware that I bring that intensity to my work and the clients, who come to me. Because in my own experience, I have seen, and, at other points in my life, I was really obsessed with this idea of miracles, miracle healings and such. I went on pilgrimages with my dad to a place in France where there was supposed holy water and miracles and such. And I was a total atheist when I went, and yet I felt and witnessed things that I had no words for. And so I wanted to know scientifically what the hell was going on there. And so that informed part of my path. And when you say what got me over, even though that had been in the past, and then I had intense stuff going on, there was a part of me that believed in miracles or overcoming what is seemingly impossible. So although in real time I was suffering, there is not one thing in that moment that got me over. Having that as part of my narrative was part of the healing process. So rediscovering or rewriting the past, or time travel, because I believe that parts of us are multiple bodies. As we're taught in yoga, we have multiple bodies, are constantly going back to the past, going to future potential timelines, relaying that information back and forth. Sometimes we can get stuck in places and not be present. But there are parts of us that tend to travel, whether we're aware of it or not. So a moment of getting over something, or not just getting over, getting out of a negative mindset is one thing. Figuring out how to ground on a path out of that hole is another one. Figuring out what you want to do with that whole experience and build from there instead of just walking a wandering path. Right. That's another aspect of healing. So, I could pull up my chart and go through different phases of it, but I think that's something else that people need to understand, is it's not a magic pill in a moment. And if there's a guru that's giving you a pill and saying you've changed because you did this in this one moment, that's horseshit, because it's a long process, Well,
and I agree 100% but there can be like a moment that shifts gears for you? I mean, I do believe that, you know, like I do believe that our soul has also a time frame, and maybe that is the astrology is linked up to that, where there's like the switch that's flicked. A client I was just working with earlier today was who I had mentioned earlier in the show, was working with animals, and then all of a sudden didn't want to work with animals anymore, like that. And so that changed the trajectory instantaneously. And I like those moments. I mean, to me, those to me feel like miracles, you know, like little moments. Yeah, little mini miracles, or however you see them. And I think that, yeah, I mean, it becomes sort of this quantum shift in each moment, whether depending how we participate in it, how we're lining up with that sort of initiation or that change or that shift or whatever.
That's a fair point. From the astrological perspective, if you were to time or look at the chart for that said moment, you're likely to see a lot of stuff going on at once. Not just, I mean, there's probably an alignment or something that will stand out that will be symbolic of the whole period. And yes, in something like an accident or whatever, you know, that happens in a quick moment, and that is very much a definite moment. But from at least my perspective, a person was carrying this energy of chaos around them, and this is just when this, you know, it's like dominoes, you know, it happened to sync up with that moment. The level of personal responsibility I put on myself and my reality, my experience is probably higher than most, because I'm tracking more stuff and I'm not, you know, criticizing myself for causing it. You know, it's like, if something bad happens, it doesn't mean I'm off my path or whatever. And that's not what I'm saying, is how people should live their life. But be aware, the energy you carry impacts what happens. There are consequences to it. You can balance it or manage it better, and have a moment in your chart that looks like it's, you know, it's going to be intense or whatever, but it doesn't have to be intensely negative necessarily, or it doesn't have to play out in a certain way. But there's usually lots of stuff going on at once, things that have been building under the surface that contributed to making that moment, that should also be acknowledged, not just the maybe a figurehead person who happened to be there at the right time, you know, to snap their fingers.
Right. That's so fascinating. And I want to talk about it more. My client just showed up.
Okay.
But what we're gonna be able to do is hopefully do this again really soon, because clearly there's so much more to talk about. But I want you, Kate, to share with everyone your website information and any other stuff you want to shout out. Feel free to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's easy peasy. I just launched a website, thegenuinemystic.com. And that's also my Instagram name, The Genuine Mystic. I'll start with those. I had been working on just a word of mouth level before, not really putting stuff out there. So, you know, it's going to take a while to get the look and feel right. But I am actively writing articles about magic, choosing a reader, disempowerment. I'm working on one now on twin flames, soulmates, and karmics, because it's something that a lot of tarot readers are talking about, and a lot of misinformation.
Oh, cool.
And there's an article on Lionsgate. I just try to, I'm inspired to write about things where I know there's a lot of misinformation or stuff that has tripped me up for a really long period of time. And if I can condense, I mean, they're long articles, but if I can condense, you know, bits of wisdom that might help people skip a few steps and not have to learn the hard way.
I'm going to have to read those, because I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah, it's just points of reflection to empower people ultimately. So that is what I'm about. I do offer sessions over Zoom for the most part, in astrology, hypnotherapy, and divination. So all my contact info is on the site, and you can just reach out if you have more questions. If you want to learn any of these tools too, I have taught them in the past as classes or one-on-one. Just, getting people more in touch with their intuitive side in a way they can trust. So they're not, fumbling around in the dark.
Awesome. Well, I know people who have taken your astrology class and absolutely love it. So with that, we are just going to end part 1, but thank you so much, Kate, for opening up so many fun cans of worms that we get to explore at a later date. I'm really excited about it, and I'm so stoked we finally were able to do this.
Okay. Well, I hope people catch big fish with all these worms that have been exposed.
They will. I think people are going to love that this conversation. So I'm already talking about it as if it's past tense and we haven't. Anyway, thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you all for tuning in. And I'm really excited to hear what your views are on this conversation. Feel free to drop questions. I'm going to also post all of Kate's contact information in the Dropbox below. And enjoy your spiritual journey, people. Much love, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye, Kate. I'm going to shut her down.